Welcome to My Favorite CX, a podcast that celebrates exceptional customer experiences. To listen to today's, please choose from one of the following options.
Welcome to My Favorite Customer Experience, the podcast that celebrates exceptional customer experiences. I'm Chris Holt from Holt CX Consultancy, and I'm live from Glasgow today. And I'm joined by Joe Naberhaus, VP Enterprise CX, Outsource Consultants. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Chris, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So, Joe, you've recently joined Outsource Consultants to help organizations optimize their CX operations, technology investments, and you've previously spent time at the likes of NICE, eGain, Conduent, and intriguingly had a role of Chief Innovation Officer for a group at Xerox as well. But see, that's all the past. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, I'm 100% focused in the CX space, which is exciting for this show. And it brings together a lot of experience I've had more recently in the software space, as you mentioned, with NICE and eGain with technology. But prior to that, I was leading BPO operations. And interestingly, not just in the customer experience side, but diverse finance, procurement, accounting, HR, legal, transaction processing. So I've had the opportunity to work with these major companies across all different aspects of outsourcing around the world. But by far, CX has the most opportunity for innovation, especially today. And so what our firm does is brings together that outsourcing component alongside technology to help brands elevate their customer experience and brand recognition in the marketplace.
And that's an interesting one because generally people associate BPOs with agents, with human agents, and that's how they drive revenue. So how do you tackle that in a changing market where AI is everywhere?
I know you have very distinct points of view right now. Technology providers will take this very strong stance around the elimination of the need for human touch in these interactions, and the BPOs, and I think a lot of the market still see the importance of human connection in all of these interactions. And so our role is really helping companies balance the integration of AI, technology, with the most productive way to bring labor and human touch into these interactions. And the measurements, right, have never been more complete in terms of satisfaction and revenue and sentiment as an outcome. And so, sort of turning the lever up and down and where you invest is this $1 million question that we're aiming to solve for companies.
And are you seeing, see, you've got the rise of the technology players saying you don't need a human to solve, but are you seeing more and more use cases where actually it's becoming more important for a human to solve?
Yeah, interestingly, and I think most people understand this instinctively, as AI can automate some of the more rote tasks in this answer economy. So if it's how much does a prepaid plan cost, that's probably not relevant or good use of time to make a call center, call around that. But if you're looking to bundle plans or cancel plans or learn about unique use cases and nuanced scenarios, you've now immediately escalated into something that is more complex. It requires a human touch. But just as important, it also allows the brand to interact with their clients and learn from them about what's driving that interaction and build loyalty with that client that you're not going to have with an automated experience.
I think that's something that maybe we forget when we talk about automation. We also become transactional, and sometimes you need those touch points to make an impression with a customer. Now, if you can make the bad stuff, the high effort stuff go away and move into automation so that your touch points are for those complex and those emotional and those positive experiences, then you win in both ways, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you have to meet people where they are in their journey. We say that a lot, but what we really mean is whether it was channel selection previously, which is pretty ubiquitously available, in terms of how people enter into the interaction. You also have to understand the modality, the time sensitive nature of why they're calling or texting or chatting with you, the urgency. at which they need a response and the accuracy of what they need a response. And ideally, we treat all of them as urgent and time sensitive and critically important. But autonomous interactions can't really differentiate in that. They give you the answer that they're prepared to do independent of where you are. And the escalation's not always as seamless as you want. And so blending those together with all of the information gleaned in the process to an agent that can ultimately resolve it and build loyalty and potentially drive upsell, an interaction, help you find more services and products from a company that you trust and you're working with already, it is the right outcome.
I think that's something to consider there. Is your humans are a force for good. You're using your virtual agents for transactional, for answering those questions, but then you're using that human experience to enhance rather than it just be a stressful, potentially a support-based thing. So let's talk about the process for yourselves at Outsource Consultants. What does your process look like when you engage with a customer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are really proud of the ecosystem that we maintain. It cuts across three levers where we have a large ecosystem of technology partners. We have a large ecosystem built over the last 15 years of BPO providers, service providers all over the world. And then we also have a large number of CX consultants and advisories. And so these forces come together, meeting clients wherever they are in their own CX AI journey to help them balance investments in technology, choices around labor and outsourcing. And so you'll find this interaction in labor will often drive cost savings that, when managed appropriately, can then fund innovation back into their ecosystem. So if it's a sales function and you have a stakeholder that wants to enhance sales, not just reduce the cost of sales, they can now reinvest those innovation funds in products and services that allow their agents to be better, while also automating parts of the transaction that are right for it. Similarly, we can de-risk those investments because there's a lot of unknowns right now in terms of what the impact will be on the human touch as you invest in artificial intelligence. The the overwhelming sentiment is that, okay, well, we're going to need fewer people, but the reality of it is that's not always true, and it's not showing up in the numbers. The headcounts are staying similar. People are becoming more productive, which is great. Skills are also changing. As you move tasks to be more complex, to be more emotionally driven at times, you need people on the other side that are as passionate about your brand as you are externally. And that's not always the same skill set. The other interesting thing is, as we augment and drive investments into our labor pool, into our agents, they now have a great deal more diversity available. We can help with translation, we can help with accent, we can augment through knowledge. And so the agent profile is also changing in all of this. And so you need a labor and a technology model that drives continuous improvement and flexibility that's often not available directly inside of a company as their core competency.
I think as well, by being that external party, by being a BPO, you can bring a flexibility and an agileness to a business that allows them to adopt some of this at maybe a more advanced rate than they could if it was an internal service.
That's exactly right. That flexibility geographically, staffing models, technology adoption are all really critical to the success of those technology investments. And then you're also seeing the evolution of commercial models to support this. So there's lots of talk about outcomes based. And so as you start to do that on the technology side, you need not only a contact center that can adopt the flexibility that's required, but also the commercial models that have it all make sense over time. And so that's another really exciting area that's taking place where companies are getting transparency into their cost and what they have to invest back in their business and their brand.
I think that certainly rings true with what's seeing on this side of the Atlantic as well, where you're seeing both that ROI analysis is suddenly ramped up so much more of like, you can't just go and here's the service now. You need to really bring it down with what it's going to look like, when it's going to start to show value, but also when you can then reinvest that fund for innovation, or whether it is just a bottom line saving. And I think it's really interesting where businesses are starting to take this too. You talked there about an outcome based model, and we're certainly starting to see that. And what was interesting to me there was I was at a company 10 years ago now that was doing that. So West, I think they're called Intrado now. They had the Holly IVR, and they were doing things with Comcast and a few other businesses. And they were outcome driven of like, it will cost you, I don't know, 12 cents to go through the IVR. Every call that isn't contained will pay you $1, or will pay you what the agent cost is, that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see that kind of modeling of like, they were innovative at the time with that approach. And when you consider where IVR technology was 10 years ago, that was really quite the approach. But actually seeing people come back to that outcomes based approach is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And when I was in the BPO world, this was sort of the holy grail of opportunity, was to find companies that would let us do everything on a flat fee or an outcome-based model, because it allowed us to bring forward all of the technology that we had available to contain, deflect, shorten calls, increase outcomes, while also managing the labor. The reality is there's not a ton of companies on the planet that can do that. And so you have to kind of bring together the best technology with the best labor markets, which is where we sit in the middle to synergize those. I think over time, you'll see more adoption, more technologically advanced firms that are in a position to do that. But it's really only been the advent of some of these proven technologies that can contain and deflect and shorten calls that can really support those kinds of models. Um, and I think that there are less talked about things that need to be invested in for companies that they're in control of, such as knowledge management and data cleanliness, that really prove out the technology actually working, actually augmenting the agent and the customer experience that we consult on and provide a lot of evaluation of in this. So it's an important aspect.
And you're making me smile there because we're both ex-NICE alumni. And I know the in-house training for the last few years was knowledge is the foundation to everything. So I'm smiling because with my former enablement hat on, it means that the team there have got that message through of like, if you don't, you're building on sand. You are building on something that isn't robust. And when your customers go at it, or when your agents go at it, they're gonna fail.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And the time I spent at eGain really reinforced this as well. Really visionary knowledge management leadership from the company. And I think the reason that it's showing up so much now is because you're seeing so many failed AI implementations. And by failed, I just mean maybe they didn't get the efficacy and the productivity out of it. And so they know they need to do something, but they're coming back to the core and saying, as an after action learning, why didn't it work? The technology might be great, might be right on par. It may be their own data, their own knowledge, their own KPIs around it. And so it's a good time to be in the knowledge management space.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring it back to one of the topics earlier as well, about the role of the contact center agent, the advisor, and how that is changing, and how we're going from answering questions to it being more complex, both from a what you need to deal with, but also more emotionally complex. And that means that the mental load on an agent is actually going to be maybe stimulating because they're going to be more interesting cases, but also potentially harder. And when you have the auto summarization technology that's there to, in the words of the marketing, slash your ACW time, when you have summarization, when you have all of these other tools, what you're actually doing is compromising a lot of that time of like, there's never going to be an easy call. There's never going to be 5 minutes to just type up some notes to recover. And I think that's maybe where we're also seeing that skill set change. Those roles, as they become more complex, they're not going to be your entry level staff, your minimum wage staff. They're going to be roles that one, hopefully people desire, but they're going to be more senior roles and more senior wages for our agents in the future.
So I think this is a really exciting area for the application of technology because you have agents that now have gross simplifications of things that were time consuming and tedious and drivers of attrition in call centers that are being simplified and automated, and ideally allow them to do their work much better, to enjoy their work much more, and to collaborate and share knowledge more effectively across the agent population. And when the technology is implemented purely to drive more interactions to agents in a shorter amount of time, you lose everything that's gained from those calls where an agent actually had to think thoughtfully around what was discussed and what the next steps are versus just populating the data into a CRM. And so just like great companies have asked their employees, insisted that their employees spend a percentage of time on innovation and personal development, we have to find ways to give that same time back to the agents in these roles to think about how they can perform their work better, enjoy it more, and drive better outcomes. And you'll see lots of these augmentation capabilities that are adopted in varying degrees depending on how they're implemented and managed.
I like that 10% time thing rings very true. One of my mentors from my Ring Central days, he extolled the virtue of 10% time of just development, and everyone always had a sharp intake of breath whenever he mentioned it. But it's like it's worthwhile. I think you make a really interesting point about summarization. So like we're on a Zoom meeting here. It will have a summary. Every meeting I go on has a summary, but I still take notes. And I use the technology. I like the summarizations. I'm adopting different templates for it and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, the me taking notes is to make sure I'm both present and I'm paying attention and I understand. And I think that's one of the key points that you're talking about here is if you're, as an agent, if you're just sending that summarization automatically to a CRM, you're not necessarily understanding and taking that action.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, I do the same thing. I think at some point in grade school, we learned about how we remember things, and one of them was writing them down. And so I'm always present with a piece of paper and a pen just to make notes, and I'll go back and look at them, and it will um, generally, reinforce important things from a meeting. Auto summarization is incredible, but it runs the risk of also infusing poor data, poorly transcripted data, or just poor outcomes, poor interactions back into a CRM is the right answer. And so that knowledge management step, that clean data also needs a level of curation to it to make sure that we're reinforcing the right knowledge and behaviors and not sort of exacerbating the ones that don't lead to the right outcomes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I see it in one of the vendors I work with where you can take the summarization data and the analytics data and generate a knowledge article. And I use the line just because you can doesn't mean you should. You know, you want to make sure if that's going to become customer or employee facing, use it as a foundation, but make sure it's right. And I think that's the whole thing here. We've talked constantly in this first half about that human touch being more important than ever.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it won't go away, right? I think that as much as technology providers are putting pressure on it as they should, and we should find opportunities, we need to have just as much pressure on elevating the human experience. Interestingly, I was at a conference last week and learned a lot of things, lots of things reinforced, but something I had not thought of that was talked about a number of times is the adoption of technology and artificial intelligence by the more tenured employees. You instinctively think younger technology, use it, and so on. But it's the ones that have been doing these roles for a long time that can see the immediate benefit, know what the outcome should look like, and see this as a shortcut to get to the right outcome, and that behavior should be reinforced. And so I'm kind of weave that into different areas of the work that I do in terms of finding adoption entry points.
I think it's very true as well. I mean, um I took a long time to start using some AI tools because I didn't want it to be a waste of resources. I wanted it to be something that was very functional. and helped me. And I'll often say to people, look at the data, and if it fails the sniff test, then it's not right. But that comes from 20 odd years of doing this. And that's something that, we as more tenured employees or tenured people in the industry can do. How you extol that experience, you're still going to have to get that experience as someone new in the industry.
Yeah, it's a great point. The handing down the tribal knowledge, which has been done, workshops and training and coaching, I think is a great area of opportunity for technology, right? You have immediate access in this answer economy for less tenured employees to get access to the relevant portions of knowledge bases and SOPs and so on demand, and in real time in calls. Next best actions, another incredible feature functionality. And so I think it can accelerate their path to sort of modeling the tenured behavior in ecosystems.
Joe, it's been a lovely chat in the first half. I think what we'll do is we'll place our listeners and viewers on hold for a moment, and then we'll come back and I'll ask you about one of your favorite customer experiences.
Great. Look forward to it.
Your call is important to us. Please hold, and you'll be connected to your next favorite customer experience shortly.
Welcome back to my favorite customer experience. We're going to celebrate another excellent customer experience here with my guest, Joe Naberhaus from Outsource Consultants. Joe, why don't you tell us what was the customer experience and what made it exceptional?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Best part of the show. It's always fun to hear everyone's experience. Mine actually dates back a ways, almost 20 years, but it still stands out as one of the best experiences I've had. And it was with an airline, United, and their code share Copa, which serves Central and Latin America. And at the time I was living in South America, I was in Chile, and I was teaching there, and I was back to the States visiting family, traveling from Bozeman, Montana, and a friend of mine had given me a pair of telemark skis, very hard to find in South America at the time, and I had a number of other things I was taking back that were kind of unique, and I did not have any way to transport these skis. I think there may have been a kayak paddle and some other things. So I wrapped them all together in this large flannel blanket, red and green, and then bundled it with some ski jackets and other things, and tied the whole thing together with a bright yellow and red kayaking safety rope. So that looked like Santa Claus wrapped up in a blanket or something. And so I make my way to the airport. I check it in. I have multiple bag tags affixed to this. And I set on my way. And this is before all of the app technology. It's checked in. You don't think about it again. You sort of hope for the best. You don't see if it's made it with you. After a long day of travel, probably 20 hours through Texas and then Panama, I arrive in Chile and I wait at the baggage claim. My flannel bag does not show up. It's not a huge surprise to me, but I'm thinking this is uniquely enough packaged that someone's going to spot it along the way, if for nothing else, just humor's sake. So I make my way back to where I was living, and I'm not particularly worried about it. It's January. The snow doesn't start flying until, June, July there. And I make the call to the customer service number they'd given me. And I'm greeted by a really pleasant, wonderful agent on the other line who has no idea where my bag is. But they enjoy taking notes on what this looks like and what it might be. And they asked me to call them back the next day, that they would track it down for me using whatever limited technology they probably had. So I call them back. They tell me, and I believe them, very, very trustworthy, very, wonderful conversation. I could tell they were passionate about helping me. So they've
Yep.
called Panama and Texas and all these places and nothing, asked me to call back. And so I do this over a few days, and I've almost given up on the bag at this point. And cell service was a little bit different the way it was structured. They actually weren't able to call me outbound with updates. So it was kind of part of my routine to check in with them. And about a week and a half later, I get a call on my cell phone from an unknown number. And it's this agent calling from their personal cell phone. we found your bag. I'm thinking, that's amazing. And they wanted to let me know that it was going to be delivered and would I be home? And I was, and it was delivered. And I just remember, in the absence of technology, in the absence of simplified communication and texting, all these things, you had someone that was really passionate about my loyalty to the company, finding my bag, helping me identify a resolution. And honestly, I can't say I've had an interaction with quite that level of professionalism and follow up. A real desire to resolve an issue.
I think you've also set a record for the podcast of the customer experience that has gone back the furthest. I mean, to be talking about it 20 years later is really something. And I think there's some, it's a great advert into what we could still be doing now. Even though the technology's changed, there was a culture clearly of ownership, of tenacity, of making sure, even if it wasn't the right outcome of, unfortunately, your Santa Claus based parcel ended up somewhere else in the world and we weren't sure what it was. So unfortunately, it's not going to get to Chile. But they tracked it down, they found it, they got it to you, and they kept you informed. They kept you interested, and they kept themselves invested and made it their personal mission to get you those skis and various other things back to South America.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I think that it's incumbent on the companies, whether it's an in-sourced call center or an outsourced call center, to provide agents that level of passion and desire to serve their clients across SOPs, across policy. Probably cost $1, a couple dollars to even call me personally to let me know that it was there, the way the cell was structured. And I think it lends itself to the growing need for what we term kind of loyalty as a service. I had a strong recognition with this brand. I was pretty young, but somehow I had points and status with United and Copa, and so it became a recommendation. Funny story, but also a recommendation. If you're flying here, and people were, consider flying with them because they really kind of have it figured out. So
I mean, that's one of the things I talk about is, did it influence your behavior? And we talk about raving fans and we talk about recommendations being valuable, and they've looked after you. These customer experiences happen because things have gone wrong, but the response meant that you felt even more loyalty to the brand, and as such they probably gained, one, your revenue moving forward, but also your friends and family when they came out to visit. You're recommending, fly with United, fly with Copa, and come and see me that way.
yeah, it's exactly right. And I think one of the things we didn't talk about is that these defects in the process, they will happen, and those are your opportunities to build loyalty through resolution and through caring. And even if the outcome is, I can't refund, I can't find your bag, whatever it is, doing it appropriately, doing it on time, and consistently, still creates loyalty back to the brand. And they can say, look, I disagree with the policy, but I can understand that. I can't understand sitting on hold for 60 minutes to get an answer that I don't want also. So,
Yeah. I think that's the thing. And I know, like, if you've got a compliance hat on, you might have heard that story from Joe and come out in cold sweats at what they were calling from a personal mobile in a withheld way. And it's like, but you need to empower your agents to do what they need to at times. And hopefully the technology is there and the policies are there to help them do that. There probably wasn't a policy 20 years ago, let's face it, on that. There was probably no. Unfortunately, today that agent might get fired for taking a customer's number and putting it on their mobile and things, and it wouldn't be about the outcome; it would be about the lack of process followed. But I think it's a genuine good news story that you've come back to 20 years later to tell us about.
yeah, it's sort of set the bar for me in all of these interactions, and I'm always extremely gracious. Whether it's, I even very polite with AI, jokingly that I may be working for it someday, so I'll be polite up
Yeah,
front.
yeah,
But but
yeah.
whatever it is, but it's not always to that same level of, I'm just really excited to help you today, and you can feel it, you can hear it in people's voices.
I read a book a couple of years back. I haven't got the bookshelf next to me today, so I can't remember the author. But I remember just reading that sentiment of, if they are going to be in charge at some point, do you want to have been that human that was nasty to them? So yeah, if I'm using co-work and Claude, then I'm giving feedback in a constructive way and not that's not very, there's no point. Although sometimes Google Tasks does get my ire when I'm trying to set a very simple reminder for myself. And then Georgia just looks at me and goes, why don't you just unlock your phone and type in what you want? And it'll make your life easier. So sometimes the use of technology is self-defeating. But Joe, lovely to chat today. Where can people find out more about yourself if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. I think LinkedIn's the easiest place worldwide. So feel free to send me a note or schedule time. I love hearing what everyone's experiencing in the CX space.
And before we go, Joe, I hear there might be some projects on the horizon, so people might want to connect with you to learn a little bit more about that.
Yes, that's right. So I have a side project I've been working on. It's CX, but it's not what you think, and it's more focused on family fun and the kitchen. So I'll be back with updates and look forward to sharing those with everyone as well.
Wonderful. Well, connect with Joe. The links are in the show notes, or if you're watching, there's a QR code up on the screen now. Joe, thank you very much for joining me on my favorite customer experience.
Really fun. Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Well, that was a fantastic chat with Joe. To be able to recall a customer experience from 20 years prior and to be waxing lyrical about it in detail, just a marker of exceptional customer experience, and just shows how if you empower your humans, if you empower your teams, if you have policies in place, and they didn't have a technology in place. Think about technology 20 years ago, that all the tracking wasn't in place, all that kind of stuff, but there was still the will to deliver an outcome for the customer. And I think what we had there was a really nice half hour or so's chat about where the state of play is with contact centers now, with businesses, and how it's not the easiest thing. You see everywhere on LinkedIn, everywhere technology wise, talking about adopting AI. And if you're within a business, that can seem quite scary, quite overwhelming. How do you do that? And that's where Joe's approach of coming to a business with both the labor and the technology, so combining that BPO and the technology side, can help businesses adopt in a more accelerated fashion and potentially with less risk as well, because they've got a trusted partner alongside. So I think the message there is, if you're a business and you're looking at your technology, your processes, your people, your customer experience, you don't necessarily have to just take the leap yourself. You can work with people, you can research, you can understand what's going on, and potentially approach it in a more assured fashion with people by your side. But it's a really interesting market to be in at the moment. There's all kinds of announcements coming from all of the different technology vendors to push and to accelerate change in the AI world. But I think the overall guiding message from today's episode is the human touch. The human in the loop is just as important as ever, and actually will become a differentiator in the future. You heard Joe come up with a new as a service there, loyalty as a service. And, that's something to potentially strive for as businesses as we move forward. So thank you very much for watching, for listening, for tuning in to my favorite customer experience. This has been brought to you by the team at Outsource Consultancy here in the UK. If you'd like to know more about what we do, then the links are in the show notes. And by all means, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, drop a comment on YouTube or on Spotify, and we'll see you again for another episode in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you for listening to My Favorite CX. Your listenership is important to us. On your keypad, please press the number between 1 and 5 to rank how much you've enjoyed your experience.